For the program flow naman po, this session will be opened by Professor Soriano, our professor in PA 152, to be followed by the roundtable discussion facilitated by our team, me, Miggy, and Tim, to be followed by the plenary session. Lastly, the summary and next steps toward actions will be presented. Now, I know we are all excited to start this fruitful discussion. So without further ado, to formally open this policy discussion and to formally welcome us all, may I call on Professor Elmer Soriano, our PA 152 professor, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Let's give him a virtual round of applause.
Thank you to the team, and good afternoon to our panelists. Thanks for taking the time out on this Saturday afternoon. To me, the fact na you spend time on a Saturday afternoon for this, ibig sabihin passion nyo talaga yung leadership. No? So we really appreciate that. Thank you. I-share ko lang yung background ko in leadership development. So I'm a medical doctor by training, and I did my pre-med in UP Diliman. Pero as I look back at my undergrad years, feeling ko I majored in my student organization, and BS Biology was just my excuse to go to school, no? But I learned more in ways from my student org. My leadership was awakened through my student org. I became vice president of my student org in Diliman. And then doon ko nakita na parang napaka-powerful and life-changing pala ng undergrad experiences if they challenge us enough. No? So in a sense, this class now that I get to teach sa UP Diliman comes full circle, where I am again working with undergrads. No? But so as an undergrad, I joined an immersion, namulat ako such that it changed my life. I lived for two weeks in a farmer's home sa Chaong, Quezon. And from my middle class upbringing, parang namulat ako na wow, may iba pa palang mundo. No? Kasi my father is a doctor and my grandfather was a doctor. So medyo komportable yung buhay namin, so it was an eye-opener for me. So you know that that changed me in major ways, such that when I was in med school, na by the time I was a medical intern, na frustrate ako pag nakita ko yung mga mahirap na pasyente hindi sila nagagamot pag wala silang pera. No? That's why right after the medical board exam, my first job was with cooperatives. And that's where I saw na tayo palang mga Pilipino, kaya pala natin mag-lead and mag-develop ng solutions to complex problems if we just patiently stuck to it and use a few techniques. No? My first job was in a health cooperative in Davao City. At yun, yung mga market vendors co-op, employees co-op, they basically invented their own HMO with no fancy consultant from the outside. Talagang sinaga nila at kinaya nilang gumawa ng sarili ng HMO such that pag may na-hospital, they just get the funds from funds that they have pooled from thousands of members. No? So kaya malalim yung paniniwala ko na tayo mga Pilipino, we have the capacity to solve our most complex problems if we had enough leadership mindsets and skills. No? And that's why I'm glad that we have the work of this team now. Sa class working on public leadership. So itong Quezon City Futures Lab naman is one such platform. We're trying to create a venue for students and universities to take on the problem set of the LGU. No? Bale, parang gusto natin isabak yung mga estudyante sa problem solving ng LGU. That way they get a taste of problem solving and leadership. No? So feeling ako, lalo na panahon ngayon ng pandemic, and then we're faced with a recession, and then now we're going to have an elections. So it's really a complex volatile environment. And I think it's an excellent time for youth to learn leadership. No, we should not be wasting opportunities like this. Sana napapasabak natin yung hundreds, if not thousands, of undergrads to deploy themselves in such environments. No? So yun yung logic ng City Futures Lab, no? To create that space where students get to work on real-world problems with all of their complexities and ambiguities, so that they become equipped, no, to deal with these complex problems. No? And then ang idea rin is for for LGUs to benefit from hundreds, if not thousands, of student projects that speak to the problem set of the LGU. No? So that's the City Futures Lab, and thank you very much. Ay, ipa-plug ko lang, no? So we started this a parallel or related conversation with the local government academy on Public Leadership 2050. No? And I think this afternoon session will help seed that discourse. No? Yung sa Public Leadership 2050, the idea is for that to become a nationwide discourse. And then gusto rin natin itanong kung ano yung role ng universities in cultivating public leaders for the year 2050. No? And if we really think about it, the middle to senior leaders of 2050 are our undergrads today. No, sina Ken Mark, sina Tim, sina Migs, Miggy, they're in their early 20s now. They will be in their 50s in the year 2050. And the question is, did we create the environment for them to become effective and mature leaders? And can we start creating their learning journeys, their leadership journeys early in their adult life, no? Such as in their undergrad years. So yun yung another thread na feeling namin na itong conversation natin ngayon makakatulong na ma-kick off yung discourse na yan. So welcome, and thank you very much for those of you who made the time this afternoon, and are looking forward to this conversation. Back to you, Ken Mark.
Thank you so much, sir. For the continuation of the program, I call on Miggy po.
Okay, so once again, thank you, Ken Mark. Thank you, Sir Elmer. So for our roundtable discussion proper, we have as our panelists, Sir Bryan Gonzales from the National Society of Parliamentarians. It is a non-governmental organization, thereby from the civil society sector. We have Dr. Edna Franco, Program Director of Ateneo's PhD in Leadership Studies, so from the academic sector. Then we have Dr. Edilyn Dividina, so the OIC of Quezon City Youth Development Office, which is the public sector. So we chose our panelists to somehow get a representative sample from civil society, from the academe, and from the public sector, so to have a meaningful discourse on leadership development. So for our roundtable discussion proper, so we divided it into three major parts, as we have sent in our overview. So we first tackled the vision of Quezon City leadership development by 2050. Then we placed focus on the role of universities, since as you can see, this Quezon City Futures Lab and us from UP and CPAG are from the university. And then we end it for the third part, what would a university LGU collaboration will look like, and what could it contribute. So for our first part, so it's the vision and the features of QC leadership development. Let me start the discussion by asking from our panelists 1 to 3 minutes, or even 1 to 3 minutes answer for our question. What is leadership development for you? Let's start on that question. And before answering the question, you could start by giving us a brief background of your current affiliation, and as well as your other endeavors related to leadership development. So let's start with Sir Bryan.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bryan from the National Society of Parliamentarians. We are a relatively young non-government organization. We are a network, actually, of parliamentarians and policy advocates here in the Philippines. And we focus on 3 pillars, no, for us ay related closely dun sa or deeply rather dun sa idea namin of leadership development. So that includes parliamentary practice, legislative research, and policy advocacy. So lahat ng ito ay covered, no, ng public sector leadership development, and at the same time nagko-crossover siya sa development ng capacities at ng leadership ng ibang sector, especially the volunteer sector. Kasi we work closely with civil society organizations sa grassroots hanggang doon sa mga talagang mga formal at yung matagal lang nandiyan ng mga institusyon na civil society organizations, so that we can develop better strategies in shaping national and local legislation. So more of yung yung community organizing, kadalasan yun yung mas talaga ng mga namin. Yun yung mas ginagawa ng mga stakeholders namin. Kami yung naglalagay ng policy or ng institutional na approach or perspective doon para naman ma-institutionalize mga best practices nila. And when it comes to leadership development, actually, in the past 4 years that nandyan yung organization namin, we're turning 4 years in December, no, sa December 17. When it comes to leadership, you cannot develop a framework for that if you are not aware of certain capacities or you're not properly capacitated. So for us, leadership development entails, instilling certain skills and certain capacities and competencies so that you can achieve the vision and mission of your organization. And napakalawak na, no, because a lot of organizations, especially for us, no, in the civil society sector, yung mga namin, yung mga values namin, yung mga principles and yung mga mission and vision namin magkakaiba yan. At yung iba napakalawak din. And for us, like in NSP, napakalawak na rin talaga ng mission and vision namin kasi we cover both national and local legislative bodies. So saan din papasok yung yung usapin ng namin, yung idea namin of leadership development. So for example, with the way we work with legislative staff or yung mga staff ng mga local sanggunian natin at the city or municipal level, or at kahit pala sa provincial, we train yung staff to hone their skill in legislation kasi kadalasan ang ginagawa ng ibang mga konsehal in other cities, I'm not talking about QC kasi we work closely then with QC. They hire lawyers to do it. They hire this and that, yung mga highly skilled talaga. But of course, there are a lot of municipalities, especially na hirap talaga. And these are people na most likely nandyan sa sanggunian for a very long time kasi kadalasan nagpapasahan ng konsehal or yun nga nabubuo yung termino nung legislator. So we really train them to in the different facets of legislative work para naman they can take on leadership sa kanilang mga ginagawa and they can insert their respective advocacies dun sa agenda ng kanilang principal. Now, in terms of in terms of civil society, kasi of course hindi lang naman kami nag-train sa public sector, we also train in civil society. Kahit na maraming mga civil society leaders at organizations ang closely involved sa policy advocacy or sa paglo-lobby ng iba't ibang mga legislative agenda, nagbabago na kasi yung nagbabago kasi yung game. There was never a universal formula talaga for that. And I think yun yung naging core ng leadership development namin with civil society in particular, in the relation na rin siguro sa kinakausap or kinaka-engage nila sa public sector. Kasi we have to build it's the process of building new strategies na rin especially in the context of the new normal na of course you can't just go to the local sanggunian or you can't just go to Congress sa Batasang Pambansa tapos gagawin mo yung katulad ng ginagawa namin dati, nagro-room-to-room lang. No, it has become a different game. And with social media around, nagbago na rin yung nagbago na rin yung trajectory ng policy advocacy. So we have to hone leaders talaga who are capable of the technology and who are also aware of the new approaches that are emerging ngayon. So for us, ayun, siguro in short, in terms of leadership development, it is building the capacity to meet the mission and vision of each organization or a certain or given organization.
Thank you, Sir Bryan. From the civil society now to the academe, Dr. Edna. Ma'am, can you unmute?
Yeah.
Yes.
I will share with you my background so that it also gives a perspective of where I am coming from. I spent the first maybe 30 years of my career in corporate. So I was practicing in the field of human resource management and organization development. So in terms of leadership development, during those years, I was very concerned with developing leaders in the business organizations that I worked with. No? So very, parang medyo, I would say the approach to leadership development in organizations tends to be very technical. Okay. So after about 40 years in corporate life and corporate experience, both here and abroad, I decided to go back to the roots of academe, where my career began. No? So I now, as a faculty member at the Ateneo de Manila University, I'm also in program coordinator for the PhD in Leadership Studies. That means that the thrust is now more towards scholarship, which is contributing knowledge, no? Doing research. However, I am also very much involved in other leadership programs for organizations, and particularly for the Society of Jesus, which runs the Ateneo de Manila. So what is leadership development to me? From my experiences, as I was saying, in business organizations, kasi the tendency was to hold leadership development programs, okay? Over a period of 2 to 3 years, you select people, you assess who are the potential leaders, you have them go through a very rigorous program to build capacity, skills, etc., etc. But very much for the purpose of being good at leading their teams in the organization. I have found more recently that leadership development training programs is really only a very small % of leadership development. Okay. I subscribe more to the long lens perspective of leadership development, which means that you begin leadership development very early in the life of a person. So experiences with family, sometimes even birth order plays an important role. The oldest children usually learn to be responsible early in life, okay, because they take care of the younger ones. So experience with the family, early experiences in school, exposures, this really mold the character of the person and even the competencies and values. No? So by the time they reach adulthood, usually medyo formed na yung character. And if you want to capacitate, usually that's where you focus on the skills. As you were saying, legislative, policy, you know, and in my experience for business organizations, more specific functional skills. But I also find that, for example, among the young people today, and I don't know if this is your experience, I find that there's very much a dearth of citizenship education. You know? I don't think the young people know what the barangay means. I don't think they really appreciate what an election means. I don't think they know what mayors do. Okay? So when I was going to school in the 50s, in the early 60s, part of our curriculum was to visit mayor's offices, you know, be educated in terms of what do councilors do, etc. No? So the engagement for citizenship, I think, is a very crucial point in the young people's education. Okay, so having said that, I subscribe to the long lens perspective. I also believe that leadership training in classrooms is really only a small part, but the bulk of development will come from on the ground experience, which is why I appreciate what you're doing. Because you will not know what leadership means unless you've really been exposed to people, been given responsibilities, make mistakes. Okay, hopefully not too many times, but learn from mistakes. Okay. Be mentored, have good role models, and I think that's really where leadership development or this is really where leadership development programs can be framed. No? So, as I said, I find that in my research, there's so much money is spent on leadership development courses. So much money is spent on classroom courses, which is not bad, but I think there should be an equal focus on what a person goes through prior to assuming certain responsibilities. No?
Thank you very much po, Dr. Edna. So now from the QC Youth Development Office naman po, Ma'am Lynn.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Opo, is my audio clear po?
Yes po.
All right. So thank you again. Thank you for inviting me as one of the panelists, and good afternoon to my fellow panelists also, si Sir Brian and si Miss Ma'am Edna. Okay, so I am Edilyn Dividina. So I am currently the officer in charge of the Quezon City Youth and Development Office. So prior to being the OIC of the Quezon City Youth and Development Office, I am the division chief for the Local Economic Investment Promotions Office, also of Quezon City. So after a year, I got promoted and I became the officer in charge or department head of the Quezon City Youth and Development Office. So I also came from an academic background. I was with the Assumption College, okay, and I also had stints with UP. I am also a UP graduate, and the Quezon City Youth Development Office has actually been active since 1991. Okay, since 1991, the Quezon City government has already been giving scholarships to deserving youth in the city. But it was only in 2019 when it was activated, as in when it was institutionalized via an ordinance. And this year, okay, so I would like to call it rebranding. So we are actually rebranding the office and the scholarship program and youth development in the city para mas maging comprehensive siya. And our major activity now is the scholarship program. Okay, so we offer scholarships to different types of students, from senior high school to college students to postgraduate students, or to even those taking up vocational courses. Now, of course, we have guidelines for that. And one of the things I saw that is missing in the program is the absence of a leadership program to support our scholarship program. Kasi to me, there should be an ROI when you send students to school. They should at least develop a certain type of trait or a certain type of skill that will benefit the city, okay, in the future. And I think one of the skills that our scholars need to develop is leadership. So this year po, siguro I will be contacting you once again in the future to ask for partnerships, because we would really like to develop a strong leadership program for the youth in the city. Okay, and in terms of my leadership perspective, I agree with what the two panelists said earlier. To me also, leadership is experiential. So it is not learned in the classroom. And I personally think yung leadership develops via a skills-based or abilities-based learning approach. If you're familiar with the wicked leadership theory, sila Hall, Mortimer, and Robertson, okay, so they've said that these are wicked times, okay, and wicked times require a wicked type of leadership. And to me, there are essential traits or skills that a wicked leader should develop for that leader to be able to adapt to wicked times. And madaming skills but the ones that are very important for the youth to develop are the skills related to adaptation, connection, and collaboration. In this type of a world na talagang konektado halos lahat, these are essential traits that the youth must develop. Okay, and in terms of the role of the academe, it starts with in school also, because the children, the youth, okay, begin to experience leadership as students. Okay, and so it is important for the academe to create an environment that will allow the students to experience and practice leadership. And then from there, then they take their learnings outside the university or the school and become leaders later on. So that is my take. So it's very abilities-based and skills-based. And of course, it requires guidance, role modeling, and all the other principles that we associate with leadership development. Okay, so that is my take in terms of leadership.
Thank you po. So taking off po from that, your conception of what leadership development is, no? Now we extrapolate naman po. So how do you see leadership development by 2050? And I know it's a very large time span. It's the future. It looks daunting. So perhaps we could do this more fun by using 1 to 3 words, not 3 major words on what you think will characterize the QC leadership development sector by 2050, and you could explain each word by 1 to 3 sentences on why you think that would be the big buzzword, if you may, by 2050. The leadership development in Quezon City by 2050. So for this, we start naman po with Ma'am Lynn. So as someone from the QC LGU herself. So perhaps we start with you po, then we proceed with Dr. Edna, then Sir Bryan, and how they contribute to that future 2050 future of leadership development that you think po. Sige po, Ma'am Lynn.
Again, so you would like me to mention at least 3 words?
3 major words po.
3 major words. Leadership, okay. Number 1, it should be dynamic, adaptive, and then collaborative.
Could you explain po each why you think that would be the most important by 2050 po?
If I may to clarify lang, my perspective of what leadership development will be in 2050. When you say dynamic, yung mga old theories natin, we would not know if they would still apply in 2050. So it has to keep on evolving depending on what is happening in the environment. So that is what I mean when I say it has to be dynamic, So parang baka some leadership theories that we are familiar with may not work anymore, But how do we know which will work in 2050? We also do not know. So that is what I meant when I said dynamic. And then the second word is I think I mentioned adaptive. Adaptive, So related to my take on leadership development, that leadership development should be skills based. Okay, so we should let our youth, future leaders develop skills that will allow them to adapt to a dynamic world. Kasi nga pabago-bago So they should not be fixated on a certain style, on a certain theory, or on a certain school of thought of leadership. Okay? So they should be able to learn how to adapt, how to be flexible. Kasi nga times are changing, times are dynamic. What works now might not work 10 years or 20 years from now. Okay? And then the next description for me is that leadership development should enable the youth to develop collaborative traits. Okay, so the world now is more interconnected. 'Di ba dati okay na yung strongman theory, 'di ba? So isang leader lang okay na 'yan, and that one leader will be able to raise heaven and hell and create something grand, But now it will be very difficult for just one person to do that alone. Okay, that person should find collaboration. Okay, should create collaboration with other organizations. Okay, and that is one trait I think or skill that leadership development should focus on in 2050.
If I may briefly follow up lang po. So what do you think naman po kaya yung mga challenges considering na yun nga po yung mga nabanggit, dynamic, adaptive, and collaborative it seems to be really the trend kahit yung ngayon current trend we're going to that. What could be the challenges stemming from those po kaya by 2050?
Can you please define what challenges stemming from?
For example po, di ba, you said dynamic and adaptive and collaborative. Kasi there could be ano naman po, 'di ba? There could be constraints that could block yung being dynamic ng mga youth and being adaptive. For example, one could argue that, for example, kasi by 2050 we have a lot more modern technology, for instance, no, that perhaps more work will be given to AI and such. So parang baka po isang constraint could be baka mawalan naman po ng incentive yung bilang, di ba, yung mga bata po to be flexible, to be adaptive, kasi baka they have a lot more tools to use din kesa yung sila mismo na sila yung mag-a-adapt. Yung mga ganun na scenarios po.
Okay. Ang perspective ko naman iba, medyo lihis siya ng konti, no, to the example that you gave. So I think one constraint is our innate culture as Filipinos. We are innately traditional. Okay? So sometimes like ako, yung anak ko, I have a 15-year-old, sometimes she's a student leader And when I observe that sometimes she's more daring than me when it comes to decision making, when it comes to handling problems, when it comes to dealing with her classmates. So I ask her, ba't ka ganyan? Ganito na ngayon, mommy. So in my mind, she is adapting. And then what is my tendency as a traditionalist? Hoy, ingat ka, hindi yan ganito, dapat ganyan. So that could in itself be a constraint, our own culture, na medyo pa rin tayo sa tradition. Sometimes it inhibits the youth from doing things their way and from adapting easily. And I think ganun din when it comes to yung aking second description, yung adaptiveness. I think it's really us. And it also applies to schools, okay? Our educational institutions. A lot of our educational institutions are still traditional, classroom based pa rin Parang nandun pa rin tayo, hindi lahat, okay? Pero nandun pa rin tayo sa the teacher, the professor is always right. What the professor says, you do. Nandun pa rin. If that stays and if that doesn't change, I don't think the youth will be able to develop the new skills that they need in 2050. So isa yun sa magiging constraint natin, the environment that they are exposed in. Okay, so those are my answers.
Thank you po, Ma'am Lynn. So Dr. Edna, so what are your 3 words? Then could you briefly explain each po?
In 2050, I will be 100 years old, so I don't really know what that
Mami, hindi po obvious. Para ka lang pong magfo-40 in 2050.
My mom just celebrated her 101st birthday this month. So baka nga umabot ako ng 100. Anyway. So I guess I'm having more difficulty looking at where it will be, but I'm more into where I hope it will be. Where do I sana yung itsura ng 2050 leadership, no? So I'm looking at the first. I wish leaders or I would like to see leadership to be more discerning. Okay. I think we know the issues today especially because of social media, diba? And they say information is at your fingertips. But I think the young people do not always discern. Parang kasama na din doon yung critical thinking. Parang we have to be more careful, be more data-driven, make sure that the decisions we make are based on some level of analysis, and discernment. That's one. The second one is, I think it will be or should be very relational. We are, as Ms. Lynn said, we're a collectivist society, and we really have to ensure that leaders look at the collective and not focus on, not on their own selfish interests. So relational, to be empathetic towards what people really are needing. And the last one, which I think can be adaptive, is also being grounded. So I would like to see leadership that is grounded, that is not from the ivory tower, but really knowing what is happening in the where people are really needing help or support or services. So that's where I envision the future leadership to be.
Thank you po, Dr. Edna. Could you briefly expound lang po more on yung grounded nature po? Kasi yun nga po yung parang predisposition po ng mga leadership development programs, di ba? For example po ng mga institutions po, di ba? Usually yung mga leadership development classes or training programs, no, they cost a lot, so they tend to be, for example, you got this exclusive class lang po ng leaders na mapapadala sa ganitong area to get this program. Now, how could that be addressed po? Na that leadership development starts with grassroots po?
Well, that's one of the things that we are aiming to work on in our PhD in leadership studies, no? Kasi of course we have to develop theories on leadership, but most of us are educated in the Western literature because that's what's available. So we really have to be more, exert more effort in understanding what leadership in the Filipino context is. Yeah. So very important talaga yung context. Ano ba talaga yung what are Filipino schemas of leadership? What is it that they consider to be effective leaders? I just have to share this with you, no? I just did this study and it's been going around. One of the things that surprised me when we asked about preferred leadership characteristics of leaders, lumalabas lagi yung kamay bakal. Parang Filipinos prefer leaders who are strong because they say Filipinos are not disciplined. And the other day I was talking to a lady about presidential candidates, and she said to me, ayoko ng babaeng presidente kasi gusto ko matapang. So hindi natin alam kung ano talaga yung concepts ng leadership, no? And we have to understand that, because if we go by if we don't understand, then we will not really know how to shape the practices of our future leaders. Yeah, but I also want to keep emphasizing that even in the global world today, there is more emphasis on the character of the leaders, because we've already seen that so much emphasis on competence, okay, tends to neglect that leadership requires a certain character for it to be effective.
Thank you po, Dr. Edna. So, Sir Bryan po, 3 words, then briefly explain each po.
Yeah. Medyo related din actually yung 3 words ko dun sa mga na-mention ng mga previous panelists. Siguro yung pinakauna dito ay yung pagiging proactive ng leadership development program natin. From our experience, na ang laking bagay talaga for any volunteer organization na may initiative, hindi lang yung mga managers or yung supervisors ng organization, but also yung mga nasa baba. Kasi of course, when you're in the volunteer sector, you're not as generously, paid compared sa mga sector, no? Lalo na sa public at sa public sector at sa business sector. And ito actually yung tricky part about develop or creating a proactive leadership development program, kasi hindi lang siya usapin ng skills. You have to build the confidence of yung mga members ng organization mo, not only the leaders, not only the managers, but also yung mga nasa baba. Kasi pag hindi sila confident, they won't take initiative kasi natatakot sila, nahihiya. Minsan kasi yung ganyang mga tendencies ng mga tao nagsisimula, katulad ng sabi kanina ni Dr. Edna, nagsisimula sa bahay, no? Nagkataon lang kasi ako, for example, I grew up in an environment na talagang, bahala ka kung anong gawin mo, decision mo yan, we trust your decision, ganun-ganyan. But for a lot of people, hindi ganon. No, at nakikita ko siya sa mga members ng mga organization namin, and at the same time sa mga nakakatrabaho ko sa public sector kasi I'm also doing consultancy work in in Legis. And pangalawa, in terms of sustainability naman, kasi I think yan yung ito yung pinaka-challenging ngayon for a lot of youth organizations in particular, no? Na paano natin isa-sustain yung ganitong effort. And there have been major volunteer efforts recently na pinagtulungan ng private sector at ng public sector na nagkaroon din ng question of sustainability. Like for example, yung mga community pantry, yung mga relief efforts during the pandemic, yung mga lobbying efforts na sinimulan din namin. Maraming mga questions about sustainability. And I think yun yung yun yung magiging isa sa mga pinaka-core ng framework for the next few years, not because of the sustainable development goals na until 2030, but because yun nga, mas nagiging complex na rin kasi ang dami na rin distractions, mas humihirap ang mga problema at mas tumataas ang mortality rate ng mga initiatives, no, both at the public sector and the private sector. And at the same time, of course, it's not just about sustaining a project or initiative. No, we're also talking about sustaining an entire organization. And this entails not only the transfer of skills, but also the transfer of values. No, kasi if your members right now, they are not capacitated in the sense na hindi nila nagagrasp yung mga values ng organization or yung core values ng organization, mawawalan sila ng gana, they will leave the organization, or ayun, magiging below standard yung performance nila. Kasi they don't feel na may stakes sa organization. And for us, sa experience namin, naging important na concentration or focus for our organization over the past few years. Kasi there was a time na nagkaroon din kami ng hiatus because people were, parang naglalagasan na sila because they don't understand the values of the organization. So next, yung sa 3, yung third word is inclusive. And I think in particular sa generation namin, no, sa mga millennials at yung mga Gen Z, yung mga mas bata sa amin, no, age reveal na pala ito. Ayan. So magiging malaking part yung play ng part yung inclusivity ng leadership development program in different facets, no, in different aspects. One is of course, dumadami na yung mga sektor na nag-emerge, like mas nagiging active na yung participation nila in civic affairs paunti-unti, and more sectors are getting involved in decision making. So kailangan talaga ma-involve mo yan. For example, originally kasi yung natin, yung at one point in our history, ang naging focus ng natin, ng inclusivity natin ay ang kababaihan. Later on ang LGBT. Right now we're talking about a lot of sectors altogether, no. And at the same time, in terms of inclusivity, yung pagkakaroon ng change din sa sa paradigm, kasi baka mamaya nabibigay nga tayo ng training equally sa lahat, or we're transferring values to everyone, we conduct the same programs for everybody else, pero yung institutions natin ay hindi enabling for certain sectors, lalo na yung mga na-marginalize or mga na-disenfranchise. So yung ina-entail nito would be to develop or to create leaders or to hone leaders who are able to reshape, no, or reform yung mga workplaces nila or yung mga systems within their organization para mas maging inclusive siya. And this is becoming more and more apparent sa civil society, partly because may mga due diligence requirements kami na nire-require talaga inclusivity. Pero at the same time, in terms of that kind of framework, ayun, makikita mo yung mga organizations right now, nagbubuo na ng mga policies on sexual harassment, on gender, on mental health, ganyan, etc., na kadalasan ay nag-emanate from the management, no, or from some segments of the organizational management. So ayun, no, unti-unti na siyang na-develop. And in terms of the public sector, I think na-absorb naman siya paunti-unti, especially in QC, kasi relatively we are one of the more progressive LGUs here in Metro Manila. So yun, naman siya na-absorb na siya. And we can hear a lot of local chief executives already talking about that, na regardless kung sino ka, regardless kung anong gender mo, regardless kung anong pinanggalingan mo, you are part of our governance, you are part of this government, ganyan, etc. So,
very briefly lang po, very interesting po yung binanggit nyo na yung sustainability, not only in terms of the skills but of the values. So, ano po yung parang one principal way, no, on how we will sustain yung values, for example? Yes.
Actually, nag-ano rin kami dyan, nag-experiment din kami dyan sa sa part na yan, kasi you know, when you have a lot of things going on in your world, it's hard to stick to your values, no? Parang araw-araw kang nahamon. And people, like for example, I've been through several organizations na rin na hindi alam ng mga members, ng mga regular members, kung ano yung mga core pillars, kung ano yung mission and vision ng organization. Nandiyan lang sila, you know, kasi may naghatak, ganun-ganyan. So at one point, we tried, we tried to implement parang an integration into our capacity building program na we talk about the organization. We don't just talk about the we don't just talk about the mission and vision of the organization. We expound on it, no? Kasi kadalasan yung ginagawa ng ibang organizations, they talk about the constitution, parang isang araw na seminar, lalo na pag youth organization, ganun tayo, di ba? Pag youth organization. Pero for us, hindi lang siya dapat ganun, no? In our group, in particular sa NSP, pinag-uusapan na namin right now to develop literature talaga based on the values of the organization. Hindi para magmukha siyang jurisprudence ng Supreme Court na para mabalik-balikan mo siya pag may dispute about a certain principle or value. Pero para at least may idea sila kung ano yung tumatakbo sa isip ng mga founders when they founded the organization. And ayun, they build on that, no? And at the same time, kasi ito napapansin ko ito even sa previous na NGO ko, sa isang human rights NGO. Ang gumagalaw lang kasi talaga is yung mga leaders ng organization, yung mga nasa management, no? And ang nagiging reform namin over the past few years, if I'm not mistaken, even in my current organization right now, talagang hinahatak na namin talaga yung mga lahat ng members. Kahit na, for example, medyo nag-aalangan kami, hala, baka hindi niya alam yung gagawin niya, baka magka-problema sa program, ganyan. Hinahayaan lang namin na magkamali. Pero of course, we allot certain programs na kung saan sila pwede magkamali. Meron kasi mga events na hindi talaga sila pwede magkamali. So talaga tinatansya namin siya. Kasi experiential eh. I mean, they won't acquire the skills and they won't know how we do things, no? At yung mga values na behind all of that, kung hindi sila magpa-participate, kung wala silang practice in that kind of scenario. Yeah.
So once again, thank you, Sir Bryan, and thank you to our panelists for that very meaningful and I would say na broad yun, pero na dami natin nakuhang insights, no? Yung QC Leadership Development Future by 2050. So now I call on my fellow teammate po, si Ken Mark, for the second part. Ken Mark?
Hello, thank you, Miki. Thank you very much po for the three panelists. Sobrang insightful po ng naging discussion. Now, considering all the values and yung mga tinitignan natin, ini-envision natin ng mga traits for the leadership development, I would like to ask po, ano sa tingin nyo yung mga crucial role ng universities as drivers for leadership development? And ano sa tingin nyo yung mga initiatives na pwedeng gawin ng mga students, student organizations, and faculty para ma-pursue natin yung magandang leadership development program sa ating mga universities at ma-incorporate, I think, doon sa curriculum ng mga students. Simulan ko kay Sir Bryan kasi unfortunately, he needs to leave early. Go ahead po, sir.
Yeah, actually, kinakausap ko yung sa susunod na event if pwedeng kung kailangan ko na ba lumipat. Pero mamaya pa naman yan, may oras pa naman. When it comes to to the role of student organizations, or are we also going to talk about yung role ng faculty?
Yes, sir. You can incorporate it po.
Okay. Mas makakapag-focus kasi ako sa students kasi di pa ako faculty as of the moment. Ayan. Pero when it comes to to students, may attempts na kasi from higher ups, yung mga management o yung mga administration ng mga universities na talagang bigyan ng emphasis ang youth formation, no? And this is not only in universities but also, for example, sa DepEd. Kasi actually yung next event na pupuntahan ko ay sa DepEd yon. At ang nagpapatakbo nung event nila ay ang Youth Formation Division nila. So parang try nilang ilabas sa four walls of the classroom yung capacity building at yung learning experience. So what they're doing right now is they're trying to kickstart a simulation of the legislative process, no, na bubuo ng mga education related na legislation yung mga bata, no, yung mga SHS na kasali doon. And it's not only limited to that, no, kasi even in universities through the NSTP program, especially yung CWATs, ganyan, tsaka sa ROTC, may naman din yan, may leadership component. Kasi ako nadaanan ko, unfortunately, both yung ROTC tsaka yung CWATs, no? And even at the high school level, nadaanan ko rin yung CAP. may ano rin siya talaga, may leadership component. Ang problem ko lang dun kasi, masyadong mataas yung pag-emphasize natin dun sa ano na yun, dun sa program na yun as dyan mo ma-develop talaga leadership mo. Ang nagiging resulta, people have a militaristic view of leadership pagka-graduate nila. And that was the case for me when I graduated from high school at bago ako pumasok ng UP, na yun nga parang authoritarian yung ano yung nagiging dating, which is not supposed to be the name of the game. Otherwise, you would result in a similar situation that we are in right now, di ba? So, ang ano dyan is for the succeeding years, kung sakali man umabot tayo ng 2050, ang ano kasi natin dyan is more of yung mas consultative din yung yung pagkakaroon ng youth leadership program natin sa mga universities in particular, na kasi nung pumasok sa university, wala naman din tanong sa ano ba yung gusto mong ano ba yung gusto mong trajectory for leadership. We were not part of the planning do sa pag-design nung namin nung CWATs or mga community projects namin, whether part yan ng curriculum or hindi. So may mga ganun akong concerns kasi nakikita ko yung effect if involved sa decision making or sa planning yung mga students before ma-implement yung program, malaking bagay talaga siya. So imagine going to a community, you're going to do DRM mapping, ganyan. You're going to help capacitate yung mga tito na nandyan or yung mga nandyan sa sa community na yan. Tapos pag umalis ka, pwede na sila mag-take over, no? Minsan yung ibang mga estudyante gusto nila ng ganung program pero hindi nila magawa kasi may predetermined na design for the project. So yun nga, that's one thing na kailangan maging consultative siya on the part of the school administration. Now, in terms of student organizations, I think hindi naman mahirapan dyan ang karamihan ng mga student organizations kasi, well, in particular dito sa Manila, pag-usapan natin sa Manila, halos lahat naman ng major universities dito ay may youth formation or student formation program. In particular, for example, sa UST, ginagawa nila yan, no? Na tinitrain nila yung leadership capacity ng mga estudyante as well as yung capacity nila to empathize, no, by partnering with communities outside of the university, not only in Metro Manila, but also, for example, yung mga AITA sa Pampanga, ganyan. Tapos, yung mga estudyante, sila yung parang hinahayaan na bumuo ng program on their own. So, ito yung pera ng university, kayo magplano, submit all the reports, bahala na kayo paano siya gagawin, tapos execute nyo lang. Diba? In our university kasi, in UP, for example, iba kasi yung natin kasi we don't have to ask the Student Affairs Office para mag-implement ng program. No? Pero at the same time, ang nagiging problem kasi ng mga student organizations, and crucial to for me kasi a lot of the professionals that we have right now at yung mga tumutungtong sa leadership positions eventually ay nagsisimula sa mga student organizations. No? And ang nagiging problem dyan is yung ngayon continuity ng values ng organization, and relatively napapansin ko to sa mga dati kong organization sa campus na parang hirap sila sa managerial for some reason. Partly because yun nga nagiging cliquish, mas sila, mas marami ng distraction, mas marami ng commitment yung mga kabataan ngayon, especially sa ACADS. So nakakatakot siya for me kasi dahil kinakain na ng online classes or kinakain na ng other commitments nila kasi ang dami nga nangyayari sa paligid natin, hindi na sila makapag-focus dun sa pag-hone ng mga values nila in terms of leadership. So that's something that we should work on. And siguro last point na lang din siguro, looking at how itong leadership development program can emanate from student organizations or from universities, tapos makakatulong siya sa, for example, youth development program ng LGU. I think very active naman din po ang QC sa mga partnerships na medyo nga po ni Ma'am Lynn kanina. And actually kami rin po sa NSP, we partnered before with the with the Quezon City government sa isang leadership development program. Mostly students din yung mga participants, mga kabataan, at actually iba nag-work na no? About legis naman siya, about developing policies. So mas ginawa namin siyang engaging, ganyan. So na-implement siya, yung mga na-produce nila mga legislation ay umabot na sa local sanggunian. And I think yung opportunity for student organizations is very vast, no? Lalo pa naman na ang training ng LYDC tsaka ng SK ay mandated under RA 10742, 'di ba? So, ang nangyari kasi before sa experience ko with SK kasi I ran dito sa sa Quezon City nagkaroon kami ng mandatory training under the Quezon City government in partnership with DILG and NYC. Pero nung time kino-compare ko kasi siya we were part of the consultative session on that with the NYC bago nila i-roll out yung mga mandatory trainings for SK. Tapos nung ako na mismo yung sumasalo nung output nun bilang elected official at that time kasi nag-resign na ako, walang nagbago. Kahit na ang dami namin sinuggest noon sa NYC na ganito, ganyan kasi hindi kayo maiintindihan ng mga kabataan namin if ganyan. So hindi siya I think going back lang sa initial point ko, it has to be kahit estudyante ang involved, it has to be bottom up hindi siya top down dapat sa natin sa pag-develop ng program. And that's the kind of collaboration sana na gusto naming ma-achieve. Not only on the part of NSP but also on the part of other SK leaders, mga members ng LYDC sa QC and also elsewhere. Ayun.
Thank you very much, sir. Follow-up question lang po. About po dun sa role ng civil society organization, particularly yung organization niyo po, National Society of Parliamentarians, how do you think you can incorporate yung vision and goal ng inyong organization or other CSO doon sa mga goal ng universities, especially sa pag-hone po ng leadership development skills ng mga estudyante, considering, nasabi niyo po, estudyante, di ba? Parang pag sinabi mong parliament, parang kinakabahan agad yung mga estudyante. Ano ba yon? Parang ganon. Or ano ba yung laman nun? So ano po yung sa tingin yung pwedeng maging initial plan and initiative ng CSOs, particularly ng inyong organization, para mas matanggap siya at mas maintindihan ng mga kabataan?
Actually coming from from NCPAG, actually di nalalayo yung namin, yung vision ng NSP dun sa vision ng karamihan ng mga natin, mga research institutions, no. Research is also a part of our a part of our initiative. So halos nagkakaroon kami ng mga parallel partnerships talaga, like for example with ASOB and some representatives from NCPAG, naka-partner namin yan because we have similar values, no. And ang kasi namin, siguro kasi kung iisa-isahin ko pa yung mga vision namin, abuti tayo ng siyam-siyam. Pero ang pinaka-motto kasi ng organization namin is building the future of democracy. And I think yun naman din ang purpose ng ating mga universities, especially those na, lalo na yung mga state universities natin na may talaga may public service character, no? And doon po pasok yung commonality nila. Now, how yung question mo kanina, Ken Mark, is how can civil society organizations assist sa mga ganon para hindi sila or how can we intervene na hindi ma-intimidate yung mga tao? Actually, real challenge yan, no? Kasi actually dito nga sa Metro Manila medyo madali pa kasi di mo kailangan problemahin yung language barrier. Pero pag dati nasubukan ko na before, we were teaching policy making sa mga SK from one of the northernmost towns in Luzon na ang hirap puntahan. Tapos hindi sila halos nag-Filipino sila, pero mas sanay sila magsulat in Ilocano. So, swerte lang namin may team kami na marunong. Ako, nakakabasa ko ng Ilocano So, hinayaan ko sila, magsulat kayo. I mean, that's not the language of policy, but if you can write better, I mean, yun naman ang purpose nun. In terms of parliamentary practice or legislative practices, marami na intimidate sa procedure. I think dyan yan yung magiging concern about how our org can intervene. Pero sa akin kasi, you can teach parliamentary procedure kahit sa mga bata kahit yung mga 5 years old, 6 years old. How? Kasi naalala ko nung kinder ako or nung grade 1 ako, di ba tinuturuan tayo, if you want to talk, raise your hand. If you want to if you want to talk and someone else is talking, wait for that person to stop talking. Ganyan. Di ba? So, lang, pagbabalik tanaw, di ba? That is already parliamentary work. Kasi kahit kami, pag tinuturo namin ito sa mga cooperatives or sa mga IP or sa mga ganyan, ganun din pagkakaturo namin, you have to simplify para mas maintindihan nila. Kasi if magfo-focus ka doon sa technicality, talagang mahihirapan yung mga yung kinakausap mo. Hindi nila ma-absorb yung skill na tinatry mong i-impart. So you have to make it more relatable. So we try to be more visual, in-illustrate talaga namin mga situations. And at the same time, yung pinaka-importante sa lahat, we impart the logic of the procedures. No? We impart the logic of the bureaucracy. Kasi pag hindi mo naintindihan kung paano nagkakaduktong-duktong yan in the simplest way, di ba? Mahirapan din yung tao. And for us then, it's a sign then of leadership and at the same time of our comprehension of what we're doing na ma-explain namin siya sa pinakasimpleng paraan. Kasi pag hindi mo naintindihan, most likely maglilip service ka lang or you will just be basing from the books. So, how do we arrive at that? Yun yung question dyan. At bakit in a good position ng civil society para marating yung ganong klaseng immersion or ganong klaseng immersive experience or yung pag-impart ng ganong klaseng skill in that kind of manner. Civil society organizations ay immersed din sa mga communities natin. Most NGOs know the language of their stakeholders. Sa palengke man yan, sa malalayong bukid man yan, sa bundok, etc., mapaibang lugar man yan. Yun yung kagandahan ng posisyon ng civil society even in relation to other sectors. Kasi of course, government, even though na siya yung kaya na stretch yung arms niya towards a lot of stakeholders hanggang sa laylayan because it has the resources to do so, in terms of experience, you cannot expect our bureaucrats na 24 oras na sa lansangan. Diba? They have to be there in their offices then doing bureaucratic work or administrative work. Diba? So dyan papasok si civil society na yung gaps in terms of leadership development or understanding of how people understand leadership or how they work or operate in their communities, ganyan, yun yung may impart talaga ng civil society. And even with students, ang mga naghahatak naman din dyan sa mga students na papalabas para matrain yung leadership capacity nila or yung ma-develop yung leadership values nila ay mga CSOs rin. Kasi yan yung ginagawa ng NSTP program ngayon eh. And even sa batas natin, in-encourage yan, no? Dun sa Volunteer Act natin na talagang ni-incentivize yung mga volunteer opportunities at binibigyan ng recognition. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay ka lang.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Sir Brian. Proceed po tayo kay Dr. Lynn.
Naka-mute. Yeah, you're muted. Okay.
Yes, okay. I think na-mention ko na kanina yun yung role ni university in leadership development. So talagang kailangan baguhin ang ating traditional methods in universities. Faculty members need to create an environment where the natural leadership skills or abilities of students will thrive. Kasi parang nangyayari kasi sa mga universities, ang authorized lang maging leader ay yung mga school org leaders. Diba? But then leadership could also be developed and practiced by ordinary students na walang leadership position inside the classroom eh. So by how they deal with their fellow classmates, how they deal with their professors, how they manage their own activities, doon pa lang nade-develop na yung leadership traits. So I think that is one important role of universities. Kasi I was a faculty member also before, so it was one of our school policies to create an environment where the students will develop two things: self-awareness and self-direction. If they are aware of what they can and they cannot do, they will have the ability to direct their own activities. And to us kasi, self-awareness, self-direction, and then from there, the students will be able to develop self-management. Now, unless a student develops all those three things, then they will not be effective leaders in the future. And for us kasi, it is an important task of a teacher to be able to create an environment where those three S's will develop. Ayun lang po.
Ma'am, thank you po. Follow-up question lang po. May mga specific programs po ba yung QCYDO aside from scholarship na directly related doon sa pagbe-build ng leadership development sa mga universities or kahit any initial plan po? Ganun.
Okay, so like what I've mentioned, I only assumed as OIC last October. And that is one of the things that I have observed. Medyo na-focus dun sa scholarship program ang ating Quezon City Youth and Development Office. Isa sa mga mandate ng Youth and Development Office is to pursue youth empowerment through leadership and other related training programs. It is also the mandate of the Quezon City Youth and Development Office to organize the youth into a broader network in order to promote active participation in governance. So that will be one of my personal, isa sa mga directions ko as the new head of the unit or of the office. Kasi yun yung nakita kong kulang, masyado nag-focus sa scholarship program. So by next year, yan po ang ating tututukan, that we create talagang intensive programs for youth development. Youth leadership development.
Thank you, Dr. Lynn. May tanong po yata si Professor Soriano.
Yes, basically follow up ko yun. Kasi yung Quezon City, dito may Ateneo na, may UP na. And then yung senior high schools ngayon, nung panahon ko wala pang senior high school. So the senior high school students are 17, 18, 19 years old. Actually, naging mature na rin yung utak nila, may kakayahan ng i-absorb yung complex concepts on citizenship and all that. Ano yung nakita niyong possible synergies between, say, Ateneo, UP, and the senior high schools sa Quezon City?
Quezon City is very lucky kasi we are one of the few who has our own we have Quezon City University, no, na it was just recently granted what do you call this? Nasa dulo ng dila ko. But one of the major projects of the Quezon City University president now, si Dr. Atienza, of course with the blessing of the city mayor, is that to make Quezon City University the training capital of the city. Kasi nga advantage dapat yun ni Quezon City University. Kasi sa LGU siya eh. So isa sa mga project ni Quezon City University is to create partnerships with those schools, Ateneo, Miriam, UP, and all the other colleges in the university to come up with a holistic program, okay, to engage the youth in different leadership or trainings. So nasa in the works, kasi bagong upo lang din si President ng Quezon City University, but that is one thing that we are planning to do in the starting early next year.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lynn. Thank you din po, Professor Elmer. Now let's proceed po to Dr. Franco for the academe.
Okay, thank you. I see the role of the university as twofold. First is what Dr. Lynn mentioned, that the university is responsible for developing its own students, okay, in the classroom, to ensure that as they go through their journey of education, they learn leadership. No? And I want to focus on leadership being, kasi the definition of leadership can be, one is getting things done, okay? But the more useful definition of leadership is getting things done for the common good. No? Kasi marami namang leaders who just get things done, period. Okay. So what we really want is to be able to develop leadership and leaders who see leadership in that holistic definition of serving for the common good. No? So universities can develop their students, again, twofold, for leadership roles. Like yung sinasabi ni Brian kanina na sa military, di ba, tinuturuan ka kung paano ka maging authoritative, etc., etc. Pero there are also students, as Dr. Lynn also pointed out, who will never be leaders in terms of roles, but who need to develop leadership as a disposition, okay, which is having good manners, having concern for others. Okay, so these are actually leadership qualities which can be exercised whether or not you are in a leadership position. No? So very important to me is how leadership qualities are developed within the university for its stakeholders, no? For its students. But beyond that, beyond the responsibility of the university for its students, I think universities have a role to play beyond its walls, which is also what Ateneo is doing. I think very much part of the Ateneo mission is to be men and women for others. So meron kaming mga service learning. No? So the students actually learn leadership because they go out and serve others. So we would be very happy to partner with the Quezon City LGUs. You were saying now one of your greatest need is leadership development programs. So we can help develop those programs kasi that's really also the mission of the school. No? So that's one. Working with, sabi ko nga, yung citizen engagement, I think is a very, very crucial need right now. No? Na-envision ko, I think I mentioned this to sila Carlo before, na it would be really good to develop programs for barangay youth leaders. No? Parang even in their early years, we already ingrained the concept of leadership among them. So that's one. Now, the other two things I was thinking in terms of partnership is we can have leadership development programs for incumbent leaders. That's also something that we can offer to LGU, to the LGU. If there is a need to capacitate managerial capabilities, for example, or even just basic leadership development, that's also something we can offer. I think our PhD leadership students would be very happy to work on projects like that. My other dream, which I don't know if it will ever happen, is to provide some kind of a sanctuary for senior leaders. No. What do I mean by a sanctuary? I think there is an urgent need for incumbent leaders to have an opportunity to talk about leadership, challenges, values, etc. among themselves. No? Kasi in a very toxic world, sino yung kausap ng mga leaders? Sabi nga nila, leadership can be a very lonely place. No? So sana if there is such a thing as a sanctuary where leaders can go for a retreat, focus again on their self-awareness, think about who they are as leaders. I think that would be a very important contribution of universities. I don't know if UP can do that or Ateneo can do that. Diba? Kasi parang tingnan mo yung mga leaders today, sino pa yung mga nakakausap nila? If it's an echo chamber, it will not help. So probably get out of the echo chamber and again, reflect on their leadership. So I think that's where the universe, of course, finally, it's really knowledge building, no? The research and the knowledge, the theories that we're able to uncover, which is indigenous to the Filipino culture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edna. Ang follow-up question lang po, na-mention po sa interview namin before na medyo challenging daw po yung approach ng mga universities in terms of training these leaders. Medyo confidential po yung tanong, pero do you think, considering na yung current setup ngayon and yung mga challenges, effective pa rin po ba yung mga programs na ina-offer ng mga universities, or do you think may kailangang baguhin, i-recalibrate, or i-innovate po?
I would say that the effectiveness of the programs will depend on how grounded they are. No? Kasi if we're teaching Western theories in a classroom, then maybe it doesn't really help much, diba? So, and I think also because the focus on classroom training for leaders, we find is really ineffective. I think leadership development programs have to be experiential, as you were saying. Have opportunities to test their ability, okay, and to practice. So yun. And then yun na nga kasi recent theories on leadership now focuses also on followership. So it's not just the leader, but the leader in the context of the people that he or she supervises.
Professor Soriano po would like to ask something.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. No? So this is actually a class project or a team project in my class, and this is my attempt at experimenting, providing the students with a leadership lab so that they can try out, they can deploy themselves. And of course, ang constraint dito, online learning. No? So do you have any thoughts on how we can push learners like my students to experience more intensity, ambiguity, volatility, given that it happens online. This is one attempt. I made them do this. So besides this team of 3, there are 6 other teams also working on QC 2050 in other different sectors. They have to organize this brown bag discussion. They have to engage you. Do you have any other thoughts on what other variables we might tweak? Because I still have another 6 weeks or so in this class. And if you have any ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. Prof. Edna, and then Lynn and Brian, do you have some thoughts?
I'm a bit stumped with that question because even in the university, we are struggling with the limitations of online. Parang we've really had to adapt, trim our syllabi, but not sacrifice content because really of the limitation of online. No? I think the only thing I can think of is really the need to bring in reflection, no? Kasi parang in this world where everything has to be done quickly, baka whatever learning they are able to acquire, probably spend time on conversations and reflecting on what they have done, what they have learned. And that's also a process of learning, actually, for me. And hopefully in the next 6 months, we will be back in person interaction.
Thank you. Si Brian at si Lynn, do you have any suggestions on how to spice things, a class like this up as a leadership lab?
Sa akin actually, I think itong online yung struggles natin with online learning and online teaching could also be an opportunity for the students to develop yung nabanggit ko kanina na self-direction. In the absence of talagang actual mentoring from the professor, somehow dapat matuto yung batang mag-manage ng sarili niya in an online setting. So I think this is an opportunity for the students, lalo yung mga mas nakatatanda, to be able to develop that. Ang challenge lang talaga dun sa professor is how do I monitor that this person, this child is learning self-direction. Ayun nga yung struggle talaga eh. But for children siguro, they just have to be motivated na you're on your own here. It's an opportunity for you to self-direct. It's an opportunity for you to manage yourself, and in the process nga, madidevelop mo yung trait na yan, which is very essential for a future leader. Struggle lang talaga kasi I am a professor myself. Gusto ko magturo pero sabi ko, wag na lang habang online, ayoko, ang corny. I'll wait. I'll wait. Pero I think there's also some good things that may happen because of this online method that we are doing now.
Regarding naman po sa online setting, kasi I think doon tayo makakapag-focus for the next 6 months. I think Professor Elmer, tama ba? For the next 6 months, puro online po talaga siya. And actually, for me, ang malaking challenge po talaga right now is the fact na meron po kasi mga estudyante, naririnig ko po from other colleges po, kaya hirap na hirap po sila mag-focus sa mga extracurricular o yung opportunities where they can develop their organizational skills. Nahihirapan sila kasi minsan as classes or as groups sa mga klase nila, they would have to meet at around 10 p.m., mga 11 p.m. May mga estudyante na nag-meet ng ganong oras, which is nung kapanahonan po namin sa university, normally yung oras na yun, din-devote na namin sa paggagala.
Inuman time na yun, no?
Inuman time na po yun, yung ganon. So, yun din po, kailangan din po talaga siya mabigyan ng focus ng mga universities na we have to look at these extracurriculars as part of the framework for leadership development. Kasi before nung face-to-face, we had this our organizations in UP were given the opportunity to display or to project yung mga namin, yung mga public service initiatives, at na-recognize ko sila ng Student Affairs Office, yung mga ganon. I think mga initiatives to from different student organizations in different colleges. Ngayon kasi ang hirap po nun gawin kasi hindi ho makalabas yung mga tao. Pero over the past few weeks, ang na-realize ko rin po over regarding sa online classes or sa mga online engagements, pwede naman siyang magawa ng paraan so long as we are able or we have this ability or universities have the ability to redesign yung online engagements nila. Kasi kadalasan ang nakikita po namin is that ano siya, parang lecture, seminar, tapos nakikinig lang yung mga estudyante. Pero ngayon kasi ang challenge sa lahat ng faculty, I think, even for us na nagpo-provide ng mga trainings outside of the academe, is how do we make it more engaging and how do we hone yung imagination ng mga kabataan ngayon. Kasi for us, parang madali lang naman kasi mag-desktop research. Kasi lalo na for major universities in Metro Manila, may access din sa mga iba't ibang journals, no? Na sa sipag mo na lang yan or hindi. Pero how you train them to, for example, reimagine a nation, reimagine an organization, how do we reimagine the working culture in a given group, in a workplace or sa isang, sabihin natin, isang volunteer group, ganon. Hindi, ay, parang onti pa yung opportunities for that. No? These are things na usually wino-workshop kasi. No? Hindi lang po siya yung parang ano lang sa isang diskurso or conversation. More of parang kailangan nyo talaga mag-identify ng mga ano ng mga basic steps para maka-arrive sa isang proper na imagination or reimagination of things. And at the same time, yung opportunity kasi for the next few months, I don't know if magiging amenable dito yung class po ninyo, Sir Elmer. Kasi ano na po nagluluwag na po ng mga restrictions. And that might be an opportunity, for example, for students here to do, I don't know, minor legwork sa mga LGUs, lalo na kung bakunado na po yung mga estudyante po natin. Ganun ganyan. Kasi kahit po yung mga ano po sa amin, for example, sa College of Mass Communication, kung saan po ako graduate years back, yung mga estudyante po ngayon, talagang ganadong-ganado nang lumabas. Kasi if they do things online, hirap na hirap po sila like mag-request lang ng documents or just to talk or have a dialogue with itong mga decision makers natin or yung mga officials or yung mga different offices. Hirap na sila. And lastly po siguro, if hindi po talaga possible yon, kanina po kasi nagiging recurring theme po yung tawag dito, role model. And I think ang hirap magkaroon ng maayos na role model during these times pag hindi mo nakikita ng harap-harapan yung role model mo. And ako kasi siguro yung mga naging role model ko over the pandemic, nakilala ko sila sa mga ganitong conversations din. So I think we have to invite students to have dialogues with with representatives from the government, from the academe, from ganito ganyan, para magkaroon din ng bagong perspective yung mga estudyante, tsaka yung mga i-invite na mga stakeholders, magkaroon din sila ng bagong perspective coming from the youth. Diba? So para magkakaroon talaga ng sharing of practices. And that entails, of course, a specific kind of program design or specific kind of workshop or conversation man kung naman tawag doon. So, ayun.
Thank you so much, Sir Bryan, Professor Soriano, and to the other panelists po. Moving on to the third and last topic for today, may call on John Timothy ko po to facilitate.
Hello po. So thank you, Ken, Mark, and to our panelists. Definitely we have tackled a lot about the vision for leadership, as well as the different strategies that we can incorporate to reach those visions. So as we near the end of this session po, we will just like to proceed to exploring how can we establish partnerships, this collaboration between the local government unit as well as the academe towards leadership development. So our question po for our panelists is, what are the institutional arrangements required for this collaboration to be established? And how do you see the division of tasks? How would it look like po for you? So siguro let's start po again siguro with Sir Bry.
Mag-interject lang ako. No? So we actually spoke with President Atienza of Quezon City University a few months ago. So nag-volunteer nga sila. It was this same forum, Quezon City Futures Lab, and nag-volunteer si President Atienza to be the gateway to the university kasi academe sila, university sila, pero they are a department of Quezon City government, and therefore they can face the other universities. At the same time, they report to the mayor. No? So we can take her up on that, and we can assume that Quezon City University can be one of the parang gateways to this as we answer this question. Yeah. So si Sir Bryan yung tinawag yatang una.
Yeah. In terms of university LGU collaboration, actually I don't think mahihirapan ang mga educational institutions sa QC pagdating diyan kasi two major research universities are here in Quezon City. Nandiyan ang Ateneo, nandiyan din ang UP. Pati yung dalawang principal na nagtitrain talaga sa mga local government units natin or sa mga local officials natin nandito rin sa sa Katipunan, sa may sa EDSIPAG tsaka sa ASOG, no? So in that respect, I don't think mahihirapan naman. Ang lang diyan, ang next question diyan is ano yung magiging itsura ng collaboration na yon. There was this time before nung nagkaroon ng initial interview ako with yung mga dito, yung sa QC Futures Lab, yung mga estudyante, and na-raise yung possibility na magkaroon ng parang leadership development committee or body in the LGU, no? And actually parang naging highly interested kami sa idea na yon. Parang may na-tickle na curiosity sa akin. Kasi in other countries may ganyan din silang ginagawa na parang mga leadership institutes. Sa atin kasi meron tayong LGA meron din tayong ganitong institute, may ganitong institute din tayo, etc. Even civil society, may mga training programs yan, mga executive courses. Pero in terms of a unified one for an entire city na talagang actively na nire-refera ng mga tao or ng public sector, local public sector, pagdating sa pag-hone ng mga bagong leaders in the locality, ayun, hindi pa siya existing as far as I know, no. Kasi kadalasan pag LGU, i-refer mo pa rin sa NCPAG or i-refer mo pa rin sa ganito. Pero na-mention kanina kasi na yung Quezon City University, I think tama po ba, Ma'am Lynn? Yan po yung Polytechnic, QC Polytechnic po dati, no?
Yes, formerly it was called Polytechnic.
Yeah. I think doon yung best site sana for this. Kasi before I was imagining na what if ilagay din siya sa UP kasi lawak-lawak ng lupa ng UP. Diba? Pero I think it would be strategic if nasa siya talaga, nasa QC University. Pero I think that would entail po an additional academic program din. Parang kailangan may kasabay rin siya academic program. I don't know if may public administration sa QCU. Pero ayun, I think that's something that might be considered then para maging complementary sila. Ano pa ba? In terms of yung naman, I think this would be the most opportune time then para i-mention kung ano yung possible na rin ng civil society. Kasi yung mga universities then, they consult din with civil society in developing their programs. For example, what DILG did or what NCPAG did dun sa sa mandatory training for SKs, they consulted different stakeholders nung before rolling out the program. And that can be done here with the local government at the helm, no? Na nag-identify ang LGU ng mga parang list of NGOs na parang pwede i-accredit or something. Tapos sila yung pwede mag-contribute ng mga modules na iipunin ng mga academic partners natin. Tapos yun yung ilalarga with the LGU, yung mga magte-train under the LGU or yung mga pertinent sectors natin kahit sa business. And at the same time, ito lang yung magiging possible risk, I think, sa magiging design ng program. Kasi baka mauwi lang siya sa mga executive courses ulit. Like, meron kasi akong mga naririnig na mga local officials from, especially pag labas sa Metro Manila, na pupunta dito, magte-training executive course for leadership or administration sa isang institute dito sa ASOG man yan or sa sa NCPAG. Tapos mag-attendance lang tapos lalabas-labas na. Hindi na papakita ulit. Pero nakakakuha sila ng certificate sa ganun, no? And I think that entails a new approach on how we deal with local officials kasi with the public sector in general kasi parang after the training wala na Like we have no system to audit kung ano yung results ng training nila or may commitment ba sila after the program kasi it's a training eh. It's not an incubator, it's not a lab, it's not an activity that triggers innovation eh. And that's something that I think can be negotiated between the universities kasi yung mga universities naman natin ang centers of innovation natin kadalasan eh. That has to merge with the vision of the LGU pagdating sa leadership development at sa sa pag-upgrade ng bureaucracy niya or ng administration niya. Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Brian. So next naman po is may we call on Dr. Dividina for your thoughts.
Ako, I completely agree, with what Sir Brian mentioned earlier. Kung kailangan gumawa ng isang strategic at holistic at long-term program for leadership ang LGU in partnership with the different universities, and we recognize the important role of QC University. And siguro si Youth Development Office na rin when it comes to leadership for the youth, na to spearhead such a program kasi dapat nga because meron tayong direct link sa Office of the City Mayor who is, I'm sure, very, very supportive of these types of initiative. Mukhang magsisimula yan dapat sa isang napakagandang usapan among members of the academe, the different universities para maiplano natin, mailatag natin what kind of a program we would like to develop. Tama si Sir Brian, hindi dapat training lang mas nagiging struggle dun What do we do after, diba? Is there a mechanism for us to check that they really develop leadership skills? So I think yun dapat meron tayong solid na programa for that, and we think talagang collaboration is very important para mabuo yung programa na yan. And on my end lang, as a member of the Quezon City government, the mayor is very supportive of these types of initiative. Excited nga siya dito Also QCU. Okay, tama sabi ni Sir Elmer, ni Professor Soriano kanina, as gateway to between the LGU, the Quezon City government, and the other academic institutions in the city.
Thank you, Dr. Lin, for that. It's very motivating din to know na the LGU is very supportive. So before we go on lang po, I think Sir Brian has to leave. So bago lang po siya umalis, let's take a quick picture para habang nandito pa po siya with us. Okay, sige po. So mag-take po ako ng picture. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, isa pa po. Ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you po, Sir Brian, for giving us your
Before
time.
you leave, Brian,
sige po, si Sir Elmer,
if you have another 30 seconds, inisip ko, kasi namuhunan na tayo ng Saturday afternoon on this. What if tayo na, Brian, Edna, and Lynn, and myself, and si Prof. Atienza, we form this small informal working group to catalyze leadership training sa senior high schools na lang muna para malayo dun sa executive education, Kasi ako sa Quezon City, ako nag-public high school, So it resonates with me. And we have, a small handful of people who know what we're talking about. And, this can be the seed. What do you think of that? I mean, you might have to run already, but I'm already inviting you, Brian, for this senior high school leadership working group something. Para lang masimulan na. And nandito na rin si Ma'am Lynn, so she will be our internal sponsor.
Sir Elmer, actually, we can also involve our Education Affairs Unit at saka ang ating school districts offices in this initiative. So just let me know. We could help you send out invitations para magawa yung meeting na yon.
Okay. Sige. Sounds good. So kasama ko doon, Brian. We'll invite you.
No problem po. Let us know po. We're very excited for these kinds of opportunities po.
Thank you.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Sir Brian. Thank you po for joining us today. Okay, so to end po this last part of our session, may we call on Dr. Edna Franco since kayo po yung from the academe naman po. So we would like to know from the perspective of someone from the academe po. Thank you, ma'am.
I'm not familiar with QC University and I don't really know what its mandate is. So it's hard for me to say at this point how we can work together. Of course, as I mentioned earlier already, Ateneo is very active in providing support and assistance to the local government. We're doing a lot of work with the public schools. training principals, offering programs. So maraming programa ang Ateneo with that. Feeling ko lang baka some kind of a needs analysis is important, at different levels of leadership. So we've identified youth leadership, ano yung kailangan, incumbent leaders, ano yung kailangan, at saka sino ba talaga yung ititrain natin. Wag na lang yung mga mag-shopping lang naman sa pagpunta sa training. Parang siguro more targeted of who will actually undergo a holistic program para we're not wasting money. And then we can also come up with very clear assessment of evaluating the initiatives. No? And we're not only talking of classroom training, but maybe programs that actually immerse the leaders and then they come up with something para hindi siya wasted effort. No? So yun, parang be very focused on the needs and then I guess we can provide the support. No? Hindi ko lang alam kasi kung ano yung gagawin ng QC University. Is it just a duplication of what our universities are doing? So sana clear yung mandate. So.
Hello. Ayan. Thank you very much po, Dr. Edna, and to Dr. Lynn, also to Sir Brian, nakaalis lang, no? And that concludes po our discussion for today. Thank you also to Professor Soriano, to the panelists, and to all the attendees who stayed all throughout the program. Unfortunately po, due to the limited time, we cannot accommodate further questions from our audience. But you can send us questions if you want, and we can forward it to our panelists po. You can send a direct message to us, to our emails or to our Facebook page. Naka-indicate naman po yung names namin. And also, ayun lang din po yung name namin sa Facebook Messenger. And at this point, may I call on Timothy Ko to award the certificates of appreciation for our panelists.
This certificate is proudly awarded to flash na lang po. Awarded to our panelists for sharing their valuable insights in Quezon City 2050 Leadership Development, a policy brown bag discussion organized by the Team Leadership Development of PA 152, Urban and Metropolitan Governance, during the first semester of academic year 2021-2022. Given this 20th day of November in the year 2021 via Zoom Communications Incorporated. Once again po, to Sir Brian, wala na siya, but thank you Sir Brian for sharing your insights as someone from the civil society. I would also like to thank you Dr. Edna Franco po, ma'am, for sharing your insights as someone from the academe. Lastly, thank you, Dr. Dividina, for sharing your insights as someone naman po from the Quezon City Local Government Unit.
May I just say something? I just want to
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead po.
I just want to congratulate the students for this initiative. I think you've done very well. It's difficult to give Saturday afternoons away, but I was compelled to do it because I felt that it was a very worthwhile project. So congratulations, and congratulations, Dr. Elmer, for this creative way of developing your students.
Thank you. Thank you
very much
to you too. No? For it was also costly for you to spend your Saturday on this, so we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much po, Dr. Edna. Sobrang na-appreciate po namin yung mga time nyo, especially ma'am, kayo pong tatlong panelists po, to share your insights kahit Saturday. Now at this point, I would like to appreciate everyone. Thank you very much. And to formally close this event, may I call on Miggy Onyate to deliver his closing remarks.
Wala ka atang audio, Miggy.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yan, meron na. Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you lang po ulit ako sa all our panelists. Actually, we scheduled this hanggang 3:30 lang sana. So, na-extend. So, sa kagaya nga ng lagi na sinasabi sa mga webinar, no, when the webinars are extended, that means yung usapan naging mas meaningful, naging insightful, as evidence as well by our interactions and as well as the questions from Sir Elmer. So, at the end of the day, no, I would just like to accentuate the idea that leadership, after all, is everybody's business. It is not only the business of the manager or our public leaders that we have today. It is also the business of our youth, because they will be the ones who will lead us by 2050. And that is why, by saying that it is everyone's business, everything, no, in our lives, education, family, personal, and as well as professional, that involves greatly, no, in leadership that we have today. And I hope na that gaya ng sinabi ni Dr. Edna, no, when she is already 100 years old by 2050, that we would still be together, no, forwarding this agenda for leadership development. Once again, thank you very much and stay safe, everyone.
Yeah, and it was a good opportunity to meet Dr. Lynn, Brian, and Dr. Elmer. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll be in touch.
Thank you po, everyone. See you soon. We'll see you again soon.
See you again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Arlene.
Thank you
Thanks,
po.
Ma'am Edna.
Congratulations to the students.
Thank you po.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Ingat po lahat.